The corridor lights hummed faintly overhead as Eli moved through the metallic passageways of the outer station. His boots clanked against the cold steel floor, and the recycled air tasted dry and bitter. He passed a few crew members, none of whom made eye contact. Everyone seemed tired, worn down by the endless tension of the border war, even though a ceasefire had been in place for months. The silence between factions felt more dangerous than open battle. Eli reached the maintenance bay, a space that had once been used for drones and mechs, now repurposed for salvaging armor and gear from returning units. He set his tool case down and wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. He wasn't expecting company, yet someone was already waiting inside. Sitting on the low bench next to the repair chair, she looked like a statue carved from war itself. Her name was Rin, or at least that was the sound her voice made when she introduced herself. Her real name wasn't pronounceable to human tongues. Ailey remembered reading that in the first contact briefings her kind had fought fiercely, brutal and efficient during the early stages of the war. Now here she was in his workshop, armor, scorched limbs, stiff posture, silent gaze fixed on the floor. Didn't speak at first, just opened the gear case and examined the damaged suit laid out before him. It was an older model alien tech, reinforced with hybrid alloys and integrated shielding. The plating along the chest was cracked, the left gauntlet wiring exposed. The power core flickered weakly as he tested the flow. Rin remained quiet, her eyes following his hands as he worked. There was something unsettling about her presence, not because she looked dangerous, though she did with her jagged scales and the thin bioluminescent lines running from her neck to her fingers, was because she didn't feel threatening at all. Instead, she seemed distant, almost tired, and that bothered Eli more than a dozen weapons pointed at him. He tried to focus on the repair. The screws were stripped, the internal regulators misaligned. He adjusted each part with precision, tapping into old habits. His fingers moved on their own, muscle memory taking over. But every now and then, his eyes would flick toward her, and he'd catch her watching, not staring, just observing. After several minutes, he finally spoke, his voice neutral. "You take a beating out there." Rin's head turned slightly, her voice quiet, but steady. "Not worse than usual." That was all. No elaboration, no complaint, just a flat acknowledgement. Eli nodded, more to himself than to her. He checked the power relay again. Her gear was complex but not unfamiliar. Humans had adapted quickly during the war, learning to reverse engineer alien tech out of necessity. Now those same skills were being used for something else, maybe for rebuilding. He didn't ask why she was assigned here, no one told him. And he didn't really care. Command did strange things, sometimes putting people together for reasons no one understood. Maybe they thought a human tech and a former enemy warrior could learn from each other, or maybe they just ran out of places to send them. As he worked, the silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with things unsaid, with ghosts of battles and names they didn't mention. Ailey could hear the hum of the station's core and the faint beeping of diagnostic tools, but underneath that was the sound of two people trying not to think too loudly. At one point, he needed her to move her arm so he could access the joint servos. She lifted it wordlessly and held it steady. He noticed her fingers twitching slightly, not from pain but from restraint. She was strong, far stronger than he was, but there was a gentleness in the way she moved, careful not to break anything, careful not to scare him, that caught him off guard. "You've done this before," he said softly, more a question than a statement. A pause, then a nod. "I watched the engineers in my unit. Sometimes I learned by watching." Eli didn't reply. He kept working, but something had shifted. Now her presence felt less like a weight and more like a shape that fit into the quiet corners of the room. The more he listened, the more he noticed her breathing was slow, steady, her posture rigid, but not hostile. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. Did she see an enemy? Did she remember the battles? Did she hear the screaming voices he still dreamed about? He tightened the last screw and leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. The armor was mostly fixed, still needed a full power cycle, but functional for now. Rin lowered her arm and examined the repairs. She didn't speak at first, but her expression changed slightly, something softer, almost curious. "You are gentle," she said suddenly, her voice barely louder than the hum of the station. Eli blinked, caught off guard by the words. He shrugged. "I do what I can, no reason to be rough with broken things." Rin tilted her head, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Sometimes broken things are meant to be discarded, not everything," he replied. "Some things just need time, and someone willing to fix them." They sat in silence again, but now it was different. Something had passed between them, something fragile. And knew the space between their two chairs felt warmer, like a wall had been lowered, just a little, just enough to see through. Eli began packing up his tools. His hands moved slower, now, not because he was tired, but because he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Rin didn't move either. She stayed seated, watching him quietly, as if waiting for something, as if unsure of what to say next. Just before he reached the door, he heard her voice once more, soft and unsure. "Do humans always fix what they don't understand?" Eli stopped halfway through the doorway, turning his head slightly. "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes we try to." And then he walked away, not knowing why. Her question stayed in his mind long after he left the room, not knowing why. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel so heavy, not knowing why. He almost wanted to go back. The following days moved slowly, each hour crawling past with the same dull rhythm. Eli returned to his routine, fixing broken equipment, running diagnostics, and pretending he didn't feel the shift that had happened during that silent exchange in the repair bay. He kept telling himself that it was nothing. Just a brief moment. Just a strange interaction between two tired people, forced to share a room. But he kept thinking about her every time he tightened a bolt or adjusted a circuit. He saw her fingers hovering near his wrist, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth of her skin, without making contact. He remembered her voice asking him about broken things, about understanding, about humans. He didn't have an answer that made sense, not even to himself. Didn't expect to see her again so soon, but late one evening, as the artificial lights dimmed a night cycle, and the station's corridors emptied, Rin was there again, seated in the same spot, armor resting beside her back straight, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes watching him as he entered without a word. Eli stopped at the door, unsure whether to walk in or walk away, but her presence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a question hanging in the air, waiting for an answer. He took a breath and stepped inside, his tool case clinking softly as he placed it on the table. "You're early," he said without looking up. Rin gave no response at first, just a slight movement of her head, perhaps a nod, or maybe just a shift in thought. "The chest panel is sparking again," she finally said. "I did not want it to worsen." He pulled the armor closer, inspecting the area. She mentioned a low burn mark near the edge, a misaligned contact, easy to fix. He reached for the tool and started working, his hands steady, his breath controlled, but inside his chest something was not still. Something was turning slowly, pulling him toward a question he had not yet dared to form. "Why do you come here early?" he asked, not harsh, not curious, just somewhere in between. Rin didn't answer right away. Her voice came after a pause, like she had measured every word before speaking. "Because this room is quiet, and you do not lie." That caught him off guard again, more than her voice, more than her presence. It was the way she said it, like it was simple, like honesty was rare, like silence was a comfort, not a burden. Didn't know what to say, so he just kept working, but the quiet was heavier now, not with tension, but with meaning. Every spark from his tool seemed louder, every breath more noticeable, every inch between them more defined. Rin watched him closely, her eyes not cold, not distant, just deeply searching, like she was trying to find something beneath his skin, beneath his calm movements, beneath the mask he wore since the war ended. "You lost people," she said quietly. Eli froze the tool in his hand, paused for half a second, then moved again, this time slower. "Yes," he said, without looking up. "So did I," she replied, the words spoken like ashes falling from her mouth. He looked up, then really looked her in the eye, and for the first time he saw it, not the alien, not the warrior, not the enemy, but the sorrow behind her gaze. the weight she carried without letting it show the grief that lived in the shadows of her voice. "What did we gain from it?" he asked softly. Ren's response was barely a whisper, not enough. Eli nodded and returned to his work, the silence between them now something alive, breathing with unspoken memories and shared regret. The war had taken much, but in this moment, it gave back something small and strange, the recognition of pain, mirrored in another soul. After a while he finished the repair and set the armor aside. Rin remained seated, unmoving, her posture still but her eyes following him with quiet focus. "Do you believe in peace?" she asked, suddenly, her voice low. "I don't know," Eli replied. "Maybe I believe in quiet, and quiet is close enough." That answer seemed to settle into her, like a seed planted in soil, unsure if it would bloom. She stood slowly, her movements graceful despite the heavy armor. She lifted it with ease and turned to leave, then paused by the door without turning around. "I was taught that humans were cruel, clever, and dangerous. You are all those things, but not as I imagined." He didn't speak, just watched her as she walked out of the room, her steps silent, her presence still lingering long after she was gone that night. Ailey sat alone in the empty bay, staring at his own reflection in the polished metal of the table, wondering how an enemy could see something in him he had long forgotten. Not a soldier, not a survivor, not a technician, just a man, just a human. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The days kept passing, but something had changed beneath the surface of those quiet routines. The humming station still breathed its cold mechanical rhythm, but the silence between Eli and Rin no longer felt hollow. Now it held weight. Now it held meaning, the kind of meaning that sneaks into a person, slowly, without sound, without permission, without warning. Had started looking for her before she arrived. Sometimes he found himself adjusting the tools on his table just to kill the time, checking the same readings twice, just to pretend he was busy. But when Rin entered the room each time, without expression, without haste, something inside him shifted, like the balance of the room tilted ever so slightly, as if she carried gravity with her and left it behind when she sat down. She never spoke first, and neither did he, not anymore. The words came when they needed to, not before, not after. Sometimes they barely talked at all, yet the silence was filled with more than words could carry, more than either of them knew how to explain. That evening, she came again, her armor in better condition than usual, but she said something felt off. He examined it slowly, carefully, tracing the outer panels, checking connections, adjusting circuits, each movement deliberate. But his hands moved more slowly now, not because he was tired, but because being near her made everything feel like it needed to be done right, like it mattered more than it should. Worked without speaking while she watched as always, but tonight her gaze was softer, not distant, not guarded, almost gentle, like she was trying to see more than just his hands, more than just the machine he worked on, like she was trying to see him as he really was. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice softer than he had ever heard before. "Do you know why I asked to be assigned here?" Eli didn't look up, but his hands paused briefly before continuing. "No, I don't. Because I wanted to learn," she said. "Learn what your people feel, what they see when they are not afraid, when they are not killing, when they are not dying. I wanted to know if we were wrong about you. Were you?" Yes, the word hung between them, not heavy, not sharp, just true. Eli closed a panel and reached for a smaller tool, his thoughts turning slowly, like the gears in her armor. There was something different in her tone tonight, something that felt like it had waited a long time to be spoken. "You're not like the others," she continued. "Most humans avoid me. Even now, after the ceasefire, I walk the halls, and they turn away, they whisper, they watch, but you don't." Exhaled through his nose slowly, not smiling, but not frowning either. "Maybe I'm too tired to care what anyone thinks anymore." "No," she said, "you care, you just don't show it." Looked up, then met her eyes and saw something deeper than usual behind the glowing light, something soft and uncertain, something raw and honest. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing and turned back to the armor. It was almost done, just a few adjustments left. But he didn't rush it, not this time. Each motion was precise, each moment stretched longer than it needed to. He didn't want the task to end, not because of the work, but because once it was finished, she would leave again, and the quiet would return to what it used to be before the shift. Before the questions, as he fastened the last panel, her hand moved slowly, not suddenly, not with force. Just with purpose. Her fingers touched his wrist gently, as if asking permission before doing more. His hand froze, his breath stopped, the tool slipped from his grasp and landed softly on the table. With a dull sound he looked at her, her eyes locked on his, her expression unreadable, and yet open, more open than he had ever seen before. Can a human love a monster? The question came not as a challenge, not as a trap, not as a game, but as a plea, a whisper from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere scarred, somewhere lonely, somewhere that still dared to hope. He didn't know how to answer, not because he didn't feel anything, but because he felt too much too. Suddenly, too deeply, and it frightened him, because that question cracked something open inside him, something he thought he had buried under the weight of war and guilt and silence. Didn't pull his hand away, he didn't speak either. He just looked at her for a long time, as if trying to understand what this moment truly meant, what it was asking of him, what it was offering in return. Rin's hand remained on his wrist, not gripping, not holding, just resting there with the kind of stillness that begged not to be broken. She didn't repeat the question, she didn't press him for an answer, she just waited quietly, as if the silence itself could carry the weight of her words. After a moment, Eli stood slowly, carefully, as if afraid the movement might shatter something between them. He gathered his tools with steady hands and placed them in the case one by one, not looking at her, not speaking, not trusting himself to say anything that would not ruin what had just happened. Rin lowered her hand and watched him with an unreadable gaze. The room no longer felt like a repair bay, no longer felt like a station, no longer felt like the cold metal shell it once was. Now, it felt like a space suspended in time, in feeling, in something neither of them could name. When Eli reached the door, he paused for a second, longer than necessary, then walked out without a word, the question still echoing in his mind, not just as a whisper, but as a heartbeat, a rhythm he could not forget. Behind him, Rin remained seated alone once more, but something had changed in the way she sat now, her posture less rigid, her eyes less guarded, her breath slower, as if for the first time in years, she had finally allowed herself to ask the one question that mattered most. And somewhere deep in the corridors of the station, a technician walked without direction, lost not in space, but in thought, in feeling, in the beginning of something he never saw coming. Station continued its slow orbit above, the dead planet below its surface cold and lifeless, but the metal halls above carried warmth and echoes, and questions that refused to fade. Eli moved through them, like a man half present, his eyes on the tools, his hands on the wires, but his mind always returning to the moment when her hand touched his, and her voice asked the question he had not been ready to answer. He did not return to the maintenance bay the next day, nor the one after that. He found excuses to stay away, other repairs to complete, other rooms to disappear into. He avoided the familiar bench, the humming lights, the quiet space where something real had started to form, because he was afraid not of her, not of her kind, not even of the war that still lived in his memories. He was afraid of how he had felt in that moment, afraid of what it meant to feel anything at all. He slept little, waking in the middle of the night cycle with her voice still ringing in his ears. Sometimes he saw her eyes in his dreams, not glowing, not alien, just searching, asking silently, waiting for something. He didn't know how to give. The silence that once brought him peace now pressed against him like a weight too heavy to carry. Rin did not come looking for him. She did not send messages, did not appear outside his quarters, but he could feel her absence, like a missing part of the room, like a tool misplaced, like a breath held too long. The days grew longer, and the nights colder, and the space between them stretched with every step he took away from her. Then the orders came through, a quiet whisper from command passed down through the maintenance team. A new assignment was being prepared for the alien warrior. Unit A redeployment to the far edge of the border. An old battlefield reactivated a fragile ceasefire, cracking under pressure. And Fear Eli read the details without emotion. Without response, he folded the report, placed it on his desk, and stared at the wall for a long time, thinking not about politics or orders or tactics, but about a voice that had asked a question in the dark and the silence he had offered in return. He stood suddenly, without thinking, without planning. His hands moved on their own, grabbing the old toolkit, the one he only used for field repairs. He didn't know why he took it, but something inside him told him that tonight could not be another night of silence. Hallways were mostly empty, the night cycle lights dim and blue, casting soft shadows across the walls. The maintenance bay door stood closed, but not locked. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The room was dark, but not empty. She was there, sitting just like before, her armor resting beside her, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes closed. She opened them when he entered, but she did not speak, and neither did he for a moment. They just looked at each other, and the silence filled with everything they had left unsaid. I heard about the redeployment. Ele said, his voice low and steady. Rin nodded slowly. Yes, it is true. I leave in 2 days. He stepped closer, placing the toolkit down beside her armor. His hands brushed against the plating. The same gear he had repaired so many times, now dull with use, but still holding strong. You didn't tell me. Didn't think you wanted to know. That answer struck him deeper than he expected, because it was true, because his silence had spoken louder than any words he could have said. I was scared, he admitted. Not of you, not really. I was scared of how I felt when you asked me that question, scared of what it meant to care. Rin tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never leaving his. And now I'm more scared of letting you go without answering. Took a breath, stepped closer until he stood just in front of her, until there was no space left between the truth and the fear. You are not a monster, he said softly. You never were. You're a soldier, you're a survivor, you're someone who saw more pain than most, and still chose to ask a question that needed courage. I didn't answer because I didn't believe I deserved the right to feel again. She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that he had not seen before. Not sorrow, not doubt, but hope. I thought if I asked you would walk away, she said. I did, he replied, and it was the worst mistake I've made since the war. They stood in silence again, but it was no longer heavy, no longer filled with fear. Now it felt like something real, something waiting to become more. Or leaving in 2 days, he said. I don't want that to be the last time I see you. What do you want then? I want to know if we can build something from this, something human, something honest. She reached out then, not with hesitation, but with purpose, her hand resting on his arm, her touch no longer a question but a promise. Then you will not see me leave, she said. You will see me return. Eli nodded slowly, his chest rising with a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. The noise of the station faded around them, the hum of the lights, the distant footsteps, all falling away, as if the room had shrunk down to just the two of them and the space they shared. Sat beside her, then, not to fix her armor, not to escape his thoughts, but to be near her because she had asked if a human could love a monster, and he had finally realized that the real question had always been, could a human love at all, after so much loss, after so much silence? And now he had his answer. The station lights flickered dimly as the cycle changed again, but Eli had lost track of time. Days bled into each other, as if the world outside had slowed down to wait with him. He kept showing up at the same bay every evening, even though the repairs were already done, even though there were no new assignments waiting for him. Each time he walked through the door, he found her there, seated quietly like before, but no longer a stranger. No longer someone to fear. Now she was something else, someone who had become a part of him in ways he had never expected. They spoke more now, not always in words, sometimes just in looks and shared silence, in the way they moved around each other, as if their bodies had learned a language all their own. She would ask questions about human life, about things he never thought to explain, and he would answer the best he could, sometimes struggling to find the right words, because some things Humans felt were not easy to describe. They talked about music, food stories. They talked about sorrow and survival and the slow quiet ache that followed every war, but the clock kept ticking, and the orders had not changed. She was still scheduled to leave. The day was getting closer. Eli tried not to count the hours, but they hung over him like shadows stretching long across his thoughts, even when he smiled, even when she laughed, even when the moments felt perfect. The truth lingered behind it all. On the final night before departure, he arrived early. The maintenance bay was empty, except for her armor standing upright beside the bench, fully repaired, polished, and ready. She arrived not long after her steps, silent, but sure, her expression calm. But there was something different in her eyes, a quiet stillness that spoke of things ending and things beginning. "You're here early," she said. "I didn't want to miss anything." She walked closer, standing beside him for a moment, before sitting down slowly. Her fingers brushed against the bench, then rested on her knees. She looked at the armor, then at him, her eyes thoughtful. "I have been trying to understand why I feel this weight in my chest. It is not fear, it is not pain. I think it is something your people call sadness." He nodded quietly. "Yes, it is the feeling of losing something important, even if you never had it completely." She tilted her head slightly. "Then I do not want to lose this." He sat beside her, turning toward her fully, his voice steady, but soft. "Then, don't not like this. Not like a goodbye. Not when it could be a beginning." She looked at him for a long moment, the silence between them filled with all the words they had never said, all the fears they had never voiced. Her hand reached out slowly once again, resting against his, not hesitant, not uncertain this time. "It was a choice. I asked you once if a human could love a monster." "Yes," I remembered. "Do you have your answer now?" He looked into her eyes, and everything he had felt, everything he had held back, came forward, not as a rush, not as something wild, but as something simple and true. "Yes," he said, "because you're not a monster. You never were. You're someone who gave me a reason to feel again, to care, to hope. And if love means seeing someone fully and choosing them still, then yes, I do. I choose you." Her fingers tightened slightly around his hand, her gaze lowering for a brief second, as if processing the weight of those words. Then she leaned forward, her forehead resting lightly against his. A gesture he had come to learn meant trust, meant closeness in her culture. It was not a kiss, not a vow, but something older, deeper, a quiet promise shared between souls. The lights around them dimmed slowly as the night cycle deepened, and for a while they sat like that, not moving, not speaking, just being together in the stillness, in the warmth that grew between them. When the time came the next morning, he walked with her to the launch deck, the corridor silent, except for the soft hum of the station, the metal around them reflecting the blue glow of early light. Other crew members passed them, but none spoke. Some looked, but no one questioned the way they walked side by side. At the dock, her transport waited, the doors open, the ship humming quietly, ready to leave. He stood with her at the threshold, his heart heavy, but not with sorrow this time, with something stronger, with the hope that this was not the end. She turned to him once more, her voice steady. "I will return. I'll wait." She stepped onto the ramp, then paused, looking back, her eyes meeting his once more. And in that look was everything they could not say in public, everything that lived between them now, not as a question, but as a truth. And then she was gone. The doors closed, the ship pulled away, and Eli stood watching until the lights vanished into the stars. Returned to the maintenance bay, not because of habit, but because it had become a place that held her memory, her presence. He placed her old gauntlet on the bench, not broken, not damaged, just left behind as a symbol, as a reminder. Each day after that he worked as usual, but always at the same hour. He sat in the same place, waiting. Not because he was sad, not because he had nothing else, but because he believed in what she said, because he believed in what they had become. And one day, when the ships returned, when new shadows moved through the docking bay and familiar shapes emerged from the bright metal light, he saw her again, standing at the far end of the hall, armor scratched, eyes tired, but gaze focused straight at him. She walked forward slowly, no words spoken at first, no gestures, just presence. And as they met again, In the quiet that had once been empty, he reached out and she did the same. Their hands touching once more, not as a question, not as fear, but as an answer. Already known, this was not the end. This was the beginning, the end.